The early Tahoe air was cool enough to raise goosebumps on Julia's bare arms, even through the thin linen of her white dress. She sat curled into the patio chair, coffee cup between her palms, savouring the way steam carried its roasted sweetness into the pine-scented morning. The lake itself, just beyond the tree line, was still as glass, a mirror catching the first light. Soft footsteps padded across the deck. A sleek black shadow appeared at her feet, tail upright like a flag. "Well, good morning, Mr. Molokai," Julia said, her voice slipping easily into the playful register she always reserved for her animals. "Did you have a good night out partying?" The cat meowed insistently, a whole string of sounds that tumbled over each other, as though recounting scandal. I know, you missed your mama, huh?" Julia's lips curved. She scooped him into her lap, where he immediately kneaded her dress and purred like a motor warming up. She stroked his head, fingers tracing the familiar slickness of his fur, while he continued his story in meows. A rustle came from the bushes, followed by the heavy thump of paws. Out lumbered a cloud of white fur, her Great Pyrenees, Kona, looking like a polar bear shaken from hibernation. "There's my girl," Julia cooed, adjusting her pitch again. "Did you go potty, Kona?" "Good girl." Kona barked once, a deep sound that rattled in her chest, then pressed close to Julia's leg, panting as though she'd crossed a desert. Julia shifted her voice higher, pretending to speak for the dog mama. "Why is he sitting on your lap?" Immediately she answered herself in a lower, slyer tone for the cat mum. "I was here first. Tell her to go away." Kona barked again, affronted. Molokai tucked himself tighter into Julia's lap, smug. Julia laughed at the absurdity of the performance, kissing the top of the cat's head before turning stern. "Kai, stop being a little shithead. Come here, Kona." The dog's ears twitched at the inclusion, and she sighed with relief, lowering herself to sprawl across the wooden planks of the patio. Molokai purred louder, as if daring her to come closer. Typical morning. As Julia walked out to the driveway heading to work, a harsh caw split the quiet. She tilted her head upward to the birch tree. "Well, good morning to you too," she muttered at the crow perched on a high branch. "Don't let Kai hear you, he's not as nice as me." The bird cawed louder. Julia narrowed her eyes. "Oh, come on. Seriously? Why do you always pick my windshield?" Another mocking call, followed by the suspicious shake of wings. She groaned, fetched the garden hose and sent a sharp spray up into the leaves. Water pattered back down onto her bare legs, cool and startling. The crow screamed its indignation, but held its branch, defiant. Julia stood in her driveway minutes later, rinsing the streaks from her windshield, coffee cooling on the hood of the car. "You win this round," she called up, half smiling. But one of these days, Kona barked approvingly inside the house, as if to say she had her mother's back. At the clinic, the bell above the clinic door gave its usual cheerful jingle as Julia stepped inside. The warmth of disinfectant and fur hit her nose, familiar as morning coffee. "Well, somebody's in a good mood today," her nurse, Megan, teased from behind the reception counter. "Come on, it's Friday," Julia said with a grin, shrugging out of her light jacket. Megan pulled a face. "Not for me. My Friday is tomorrow." "Oh, that's right. You're stuck for the morning shift." Julia leaned across the counter, lowering her voice to mock sympathy. "Too bad for you. That's it." Megan tossed a rubber stress ball in her direction. Julia caught it easily, laughing. The day settled into its rhythm. Fridays were usually light, a handful of regulars for vaccines and checkups. Julia preferred it this way. A calm day meant no emergencies, no grief. She could handle the long hours, the paperwork, the stress. But euthanasia? Even after 6 years, that part still hollowed her out. A Friday without goodbyes was a blessing. She entered exam room 2 to find Mrs. Reynolds and her terrier mix, Scooter. The little dog was quivering in his owner's arms, brown eyes wide. "Hey there, handsome boy," Julia murmured, reaching out slowly, letting Scooter sniff her fingers before scratching gently under his chin. "You remember me, don't you? We're old friends." Scooter gave a tentative wag, then leaned into her hand. "See?" Julia smiled at Mrs. Reynolds. "He's just putting on a show for you." She listened to the rapid thrum of his heart, checked ears and teeth, spoke softly the whole time. She always did as much for the owners as for the animals. Her voice was low, steady, reassuring. Next was a Labrador who tried to plant a sloppy kiss on her face mid-exam, leaving her with a smear of drool on her cheek. Julia laughed, wiping it off with a paper towel. "Oh, come on, you rascal. Buy me dinner first." Megan poked her head in, snorting. You're way too easy, Julia. It's the eyes, Julia deadpanned, holding the lab's head gently between her palms. I fall for them every time. By early afternoon, she was jotting notes between appointments, the clinic quiet except for the hum of the air system and the occasional bark from the kennel in the back. Julia sipped lukewarm tea, glanced at her schedule, and allowed herself a smile. A light Friday meant she could actually breathe. Outside, sunlight stretched long across the parking lot, the sky impossibly blue. Julia packed up her bag, said goodbye to Megan, and slipped back into the Tahoe air, lighter than when she'd walked in. The neighbours' the Friday evening block parties had become something of a tradition ever since Sandra and Arohi moved in next door. Julia remembered the first one like it was yesterday. They'd shown up on her porch with a plate of cookies, an old-fashioned gesture so unexpected that Julia had blinked at them in surprise before grinning like a fool. Nobody did that anymore. "Hi, we just moved in," Sandra had said, her arm looped around Arohi's. "We thought, since it's COVID and everyone's so isolated, maybe we could do a backyard gathering? Distanced, safe, but still human." And so it started. The block, usually a sleepy stretch of cabins and cottages tucked into the pines, came alive. Neighbours who'd barely traded more than a wave at the mailbox now lingered around the small fire, wine glasses in hand, stories spilling into the smoky air. Julia, usually content with her animals for company, found herself grateful for the laughter, the easy warmth of community. Of course, not everyone appreciated it. Dorothy, self-appointed queen of the street, complete with a permanent scowl and an invented title of acting Hoa president, despite there being no Ho. Minine eventually came storming into one of the gatherings. Julia could still picture her, arms folded tight, lips pressed thin. "Party's over," Dorothy had declared. "This isn't allowed on our block." Sandra and Arohi, bless them, had tried politeness first. "You're welcome to join us, Dorothy. We're all distanced and masked." But when Dorothy caught sight of their interlaced fingers, her face twisted. She actually spat on the ground. "You two are going straight to hell." Julia's jaw had clenched. But before she could step in, a chorus of neighbours rose around her, voices calm, reasonable, trying to cool the fire. Dorothy had huffed off, only to return later with the police in tow. Julia would never forget the way the officers' expressions shifted from polite confusion to thinly veiled irritation as Dorothy ranted. Neighbours began filming her meltdown, and when she realised she had no makeup on, she retreated in a hurry. Weeks later, Sandra and Arohi received a letter, complete with forged signatures threatening legal action for code violations. Julia had been the first to volunteer to accompany them to Dorothy's door. Dorothy, predictably, blustered and bluffed, until Sandra slipped a business card from her pocket. Civil litigation, prestigious San Francisco firm. The look on Dorothy's face, the way her bluster drained into tight-lipped fury before she slammed the door, was priceless. From that day forward, Julia, Sandra and Arohi were firmly on Dorothy's blacklist, which suited Julia just fine. Meeting Amir, Julia balanced the warm dish of turmeric egg-fried rice in her hands as she walked next door, the last rays of sunset painting the tall pines in soft gold. Laughter filtered out from Sandra and Arohi's house, welcoming before she even knocked. "Sorry I'm late," Julia said as she stepped in, lifting the dish like a trophy. Sandra and Arohi exchanged knowing looks. Julia froze. "What? Don't tell me I forgot something," Arohi smirked. Julia, her eyes widened. Oh no. She slapped her forehead, spun on her heel, and darted back across the street. Moments later she returned, slightly breathless, a bottle of wine in her arms. "There. Now I'm a decent guest." Sandra laughed and hugged her. "Perfect. But it'll just be us four tonight." "Four?" Julia glanced around. "My brother's coming," Arohi said with a small smile. "From San Fran," Julia guessed. Actually, Sandra cut in, pointing toward the ceiling. "He lives up there." Julia blinked. "Up there? Not like that." Sandra burst out laughing. "He's a pilot." Julia exhaled. Got me nervous for a second. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Arohi darted over, and a tall man stepped inside, suitcase in hand. His shoulders carried the ease of someone who lived in airports, but his smile was immediate and warm. "Amir." Arohi wrapped him in a hug, then tugged him toward Sandra. Finally, his gaze landed on Julia. "I'm Julia." She held out her hand. "Amir," he said, shaking firmly. His smile crinkled at the corners of his eyes, the same as his sister's, Julia noticed. "He's only a year older than me," Arohi announced, rolling her eyes. "But he acts like he's decades older. Always has." "Someone has to look out for you," Amir said, dropping his bag by the door. Remember when you almost burned the house down with a toaster? That was one time. Arohi shot back. And you were the one who forgot to take the Pop-Tarts out. Julia laughed, caught in the rhythm of their siblings sparring. I feel like I just walked into the middle of a sitcom. Pretty much, Sandra said, grinning. They settled in around the dining table. Julia poured Amir a glass of wine, then slid the plate of fried rice toward him. This is very tasty, so simple, but so good, Amir said after a few bites. He glanced at Sandra. Did you make it? Julia lifted her hand. That was me. Vegetarian. Amir turned his smile on her. Honestly, it's better without the meat. Arohi groaned. Careful, Julia. Don't encourage him. He already thinks his taste is superior to everyone else's. It usually is, Amir replied smoothly, flashing his sister a grin. Julia ducked her head, laughing into her glass. Later, they drifted outside to the fire pit, wine glasses in hand. Stories spilled into the night air, travel mishaps, family quirks, Tahoe gossip. Julia listened to the siblings volley back and forth, their rhythm fast and familiar. She found herself watching Amir's expressions, the quiet confidence behind his teasing, the way his eyes caught the firelight when he smiled. It was subtle, but enough to make Julia wonder if he'd noticed her too. Breakfast with Amir Julia had hoped for a slow Saturday morning, but Kona had other plans. The Great Pyrenees bounded onto the bed like a furry avalanche, tail wagging, paws pressing into Julia's ribs until she groaned and sat up. I know, sweet pea, Julia muttered, rubbing her eyes. You have to go potty. Outside, the air was cool enough to sting. Julia yawned as she stretched, watching Kona nose through every corner of the backyard, like it was her duty to inventory the world. A voice drifted over the fence. You're up early too? Julia turned, startled, then relaxed. Amir was leaning on the fence, laptop still open on the patio table behind him. His hair was mussed, hoodie pulled over his head, and even at this hour he carried that easy grin. It's me, Amir, he added when she didn't answer right away. Oh, right. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I forgot you were there. Not surprised, he teased. Jet lag. I figured I'd catch up on emails. Must be rough, Julia said, smiling faintly. It's part of the job, he shrugged. Julia laughed. Come over. I'll put on a pot and make some breakfast. Minutes later, Kona sniffed Amir at the door, her massive head leveled squarely with his crotch. He froze, then laughed nervously. Wow, that's a big dog. Julia smirked, scratching Kona's neck. Her name's Kona. She doesn't let anyone pass the door without an inspection. Fair enough, Amir said, still laughing. Security detail. Once cleared, he followed Julia inside, pulling off his hoodie. She moved easily around the kitchen, setting bread in the toaster and cracking eggs into a skillet. Amir leaned on the counter, watching her with the curiosity of someone stepping into a new rhythm and liking it. Need help? He asked. You can pour the coffee, she said. He did, setting steaming mugs down just as the smell of butter and avocado filled the kitchen. They sat together at the island, plates steaming, the morning quiet but for the clink of silverware. The cat door clicked, and a sleek black shape slinked in. Molokai jumped onto the counter with imperious grace, fixing Amir with a slow blink. Julia's lips curved. Guess who's joining us? She pitched her voice high and sweet. Good morning, Mr. Kai. This is Amir. The cat sniffed the air, eyes narrowing. Julia spoke for him. Mum, who is this guy? Amir chuckled, leaning in. I'm just having breakfast. Want some? He offered a bit of egg on his fork. Kai leaned forward, sniffed, then turned his head dramatically away. Stinks, Julia said in Kai's voice, and Amir laughed, a rich sound that filled the kitchen. Julia pointed at Kona, sprawled at her feet. He got no room to talk. He likes to eat his own butt. Amir clapped a hand over his mouth, shaking with laughter. You can't say that. I didn't, Julia grinned. Kona did. Kona thumped her tail, as if in agreement. They both cracked up, the kitchen bright with it. For a moment, Julia caught Amir watching her, not just amused, but genuinely charmed, eyes warm, lingering a beat longer than before. She looked down, tucking her hair again, heart skipping strangely. Breakfast stretched out with more laughter, more ridiculous animal voices, until the plates were empty and the coffee gone. By then, it didn't feel like two neighbours politely sharing a meal. It felt like something else entirely quieter, warmer, a little dangerous. A walk in the nature Kona was in her element. The Great Pyrenees was a cloud of happy white fur, charging ahead on the trail as if trying to personally inventory every tree in the Sierra Nevada forest. Julia laughed, enjoying the pull of the leash and the feeling of her lungs expanding with the cool, pine-scented air. "She's a natural trailblazer, isn't she?" Amir said, jogging to catch up. He looked completely different from the travel-weary pilot from the night before. His eyes, the same warm brown as Arohi's, were wide with genuine pleasure as he took in the towering pines and the deep, rich blue of the sky. Julia felt a little tug of pride, as if she were personally responsible for the scenery. She is. This is her office. She feels it's her duty to make sure all the squirrels know she's on shift. Amir smiled, and this time, Julia noticed how the sun caught the faint stubble on his jaw. "You know, for the longest time I just thought of Tahoe as casinos and a big lake," he admitted. "I didn't realize there were trails like this, or these kinds of views. You're a good tour guide. It has a way of surprising you," Julia murmured, her gaze lingering on him. The ease with which they had slipped into this walking side by side, sharing the quiet beauty of the morning, made her heart feel light, almost dangerously buoyant. The chemistry was undeniably there with Amir. He was funny and kind, and she didn't have to work to keep the conversation flowing. They paused at a rocky outcrop that offered a spectacular view of the lake, still mirroring the sky in its glassy surface. Kona settled at their feet with a sigh of canine contentment. "It's beautiful," Amir said, turning to her. "Thanks for bringing me out here." "My pleasure," Julia replied, her voice softer than intended. She met his gaze, and the world narrowed to the two of them, the scent of pine, the warm pressure of his presence, the unspoken question in his eyes. He lifted a hand, and Julia's breath hitched, thinking he was going to touch her cheek. But before he could, his phone buzzed, cutting through the silence with a jarring electronic chirp. Amir sighed, pulling his hand back as he reached into his pocket. "Hold on, 1 second. It's my office. Apparently, a flight's been grounded in Istanbul, and the crew rotation is a nightmare." He turned a few steps away, frustration etched on his face as he began a rapid-fire conversation in a language Julia didn't recognize. Julia took the moment to compose herself, stroking Kona's head. "Too fast, Julia," she chided herself. "It's nice, but pump the brakes." The truth was, she hadn't felt this kind of immediate, easy connection in years. It felt safe, simple, and beautifully uncomplicated. But what about butterflies? A completely different kind of quiet settled in her memory. She thought of a softly lit gallery room 3 weeks ago, the smell of canvas and expensive wine, and a reserved, gentle smile. Liam. Julia had been drawn to the exhibit by the moody, evocative landscapes, only to be drawn further by the artist himself. Liam, an artist and art dealer from Monterey, was a quiet, considerate gentleman. They'd spent half an hour talking about the light on the coastline before he asked her for coffee. That date had been perfect. Liam listened, truly listened, and when he spoke, his observations were thoughtful and deep. He was the kind of man who made her feel entirely, completely seen. Not as a trans woman, but as Julia. She'd left with butterflies in her stomach, sure they had hit it off pretty well, but she hadn't heard back from him since. No call, no text. She'd chalked it up to him being busy with shows, or perhaps a sudden, painful realization on his part. The sting of the uncertainty still lingered. Now she was standing on a mountain with the lovely, available Amir, who made her laugh out loud. The contrast left her truly confused. Amir was the joy, the fun, the easy path. Liam was the deep connection, the lingering what-if, the reason for the butterflies. Amir finally hung up, turning back with a look of apology. "Sorry." That was a black hole of corporate travel chaos. "Where were we?" Julia smiled, trying to clear the sudden confusion in her mind. "We were just enjoying the view." "It's a good one." "It is," he agreed, stepping closer. "It is." The ghosting that night, back in her own house, Julia put on a pot of tea and tried to focus on an old movie, but the memories of the day and the weeks before kept intruding. She was being pulled in 2 directions by 2 very different men. Liam. Why hadn't he called? She didn't often allow herself to be vulnerable with a new partner, especially given her identity. But Liam had made it so easy. After their coffee date, he'd told her he'd be back in town for a few more days, then heading to a small show in Reno before driving back to Monterey. He'd promised to call. The silence felt like a dismissal, and it hurt. She picked up her phone, scrolling to Liam's contact. Her thumb hovered over the message icon. Should I reach out? Suddenly, her phone rang, startling her. It wasn't Liam. It was Amir. "Hey," he said, his voice warm and casual. I just talked to Arohi. She and Sandra are thinking of driving to Truckee for dinner. Want to join us? Julia smiled, the confusion momentarily pushed aside by the immediate invitation. That sounds great, but I'm going to pass tonight. Long day. Oh, bummer. Well, I wanted to say thanks again for the tour. I'm thinking I'll stay an extra day or two. Maybe we could check out the water? I'd like that, Julia said, a genuine warmth spreading through her chest. Amir was present. Amir was here. She hung up, feeling a renewed sense of connection to the man next door. But as she placed her phone down, a single new notification popped up, a text message from an unknown number. I know this is late. Monterey's been crazy. I'm actually driving through Tahoe tomorrow morning on the way to a gallery opening in Reno. Can I buy you a real dinner? Julia sat back, the teacup forgotten in her hand. The ghost of her butterflies had just materialized, demanding to be seen. Her confusion deepened. Amir, the funny, kind, available man, had just asked her out for Sunday. Liam, the quiet, considerate, elusive man, had just asked her out for tomorrow night. She had to make a choice. The reckoning Julia reread Liam's text message. The message was a sudden, unexpected anchor dropped from the sky, pulling her thoughts away from the beautiful, easy momentum she'd built with Amir all day. She picked up her phone to text him back, then froze. She couldn't. Not without knowing exactly what she was walking into, and more importantly, without being true to herself. She realized she couldn't keep running on separate emotional tracks. She liked them both. She was drawn to Amir's warmth and humor, the effortless joy he brought. But her heart gave a nervous flutter for Liam, the quiet artist who had seen her and prompted those deep, silent butterflies. She simply couldn't choose, and she couldn't risk letting either relationship deepen under a veil of omission. It was a terrifying decision, but suddenly, the path was clear. She would come clean with both of them. She would tell them there might be someone else, and she would tell them about herself that she was a trans woman. It was a risky plan that could lose both of them, but she was going to let fate decide, because she couldn't. Taking a deep breath, Julia chose to answer Liam first. He was only passing through, and she needed to address the why of his 3-week silence before she let him back into her orbit. That would be lovely, Liam. But only if you let me be completely honest with you first. Are you free to talk briefly tonight? The response was immediate. From Elle, of course. Call me now. Julia's hand shook as she hit the call button. The line connected, and she heard the familiar, low tone of his voice. Julia. Hi. Hi, Liam. I'll keep this brief because I know you're driving. I'm happy to meet you tomorrow, but I have to be upfront. I was confused when I didn't hear from you after our coffee date, and since then I've met someone who I've started spending time with here. She paused, gripping the phone, waiting for the polite, inevitable goodbye. Instead, she heard a quiet, thoughtful hum. Thank you for telling me that, Julia. That's incredibly honest. Our date was wonderful, and I was going to call immediately, but I had a sudden family emergency and then got slammed with a show setup in LA. My silence was genuinely about chaos, not a lack of interest in you. But I understand why you're hesitant. His understanding tone gave her the courage to take the final, necessary leap. There is something else, Liam. Something you should know before we go out. If we continue to spend time together, I want you to know who I am. I'm a trans woman. The silence that followed was long, a heavy weight that settled in her chest. Every insecurity she'd ever held about dating and transition rose up, ready to catch the falling pieces of rejection. Finally, Liam's voice returned, still calm, still low. Julia, thank you for trusting me with that. Seriously, I appreciate it, and I appreciate your honesty. It doesn't change my offer for dinner tomorrow, or how I felt after our first date. Now, tell me about this other guy. Is he worth the butterflies? Julia let out a shaky breath that was half laughter. He's worth the distraction. I'll take that as a challenge, Liam said, a hint of steel in his voice. I'll see you tomorrow night then. Tell me where and when. Relief flooded her, quickly followed by the daunting realization that the second, more immediate conversation still loomed. She hung up with Liam, already texting Amir. 2. Amir, I need to talk to you about something important before we plan our lake day. Are you free to grab a quick coffee tomorrow morning before you get tied up with work? Amir was the easy one, the one with whom the chemistry was electric. But his very availability made her feel the need to be fair. She had opened the door to the quiet, complicated connection with Liam. She would now open the door to Amir and let both men see the full picture and the risk. She was laying her heart and her identity on the table. Now, All she could do was wait. The morning after Julia barely slept. The combination of Amir's immediate warmth and Liam's measured, unexpected acceptance had overloaded her system. The risky decision to lead with honesty felt like plunging into Lake Tahoe in the middle of winter shockingly cold, but necessary for clarity. She was waiting for Amir at the local coffee shop the next morning, her heart drumming a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She was dressed in comfortable jeans and a sweater, hoping to project the same casual ease she felt around him. The bell above the door jingled, and Amir walked in, his smile immediate and bright, carrying the effortless confidence of a pilot on leave. "Hey, Julia, what's up? You sounded serious last night," he said, sliding into the booth across from her with a mug of black coffee. He was funny and kind, and seeing him now, Julia felt the powerful pull of the easy, uncomplicated connection they shared. "I am serious, a little," Julia admitted, taking a shaky breath. "I wanted to talk to you before we made any more plans." She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "Amir, I really like the way this is going. I love spending time with you. The laughter, the way we just click. But I need to be completely honest with you. Two things. First, there's someone else in the picture. He was someone I was seeing right before you and I met, and he's unexpectedly re-entered the picture. I need to figure out where things stand with him, and I wouldn't feel right continuing to make plans with you without telling you that." Amir took a slow sip of his coffee, his expression thoughtful. "Not angry, honesty. I can appreciate that. Thanks for telling me. I'm not going to lie, I'm bummed. But I get it, a choice is a choice." His grace made the next part even harder. She pressed on, remembering her resolve she was going to let fate decide. "The second thing is about me, Amir. It's a foundational piece of who I am, and you need to know it. I'm a trans woman." The air in the small coffee shop seemed to quiet around their booth. The hum of the espresso machine and the muffled chatter faded. Julia held his gaze, refusing to look away, offering him the truth of her life. This moment was the test, the point where the easy, beautiful chemistry either proved shallow or deepened into something real. Amir didn't react right away. He just looked at her, his dark eyes steady. "Thank you," he finally said, his voice low. "Thank you for trusting me enough to tell me that. That's a massive thing to share." He leaned back slightly, processing. "So, what does that mean for us then? You need to figure things out with this other guy, and you've told me this. Where does that leave us?" Julia felt a wave of relief that wasn't quite hope, but a step beyond fear. "It leaves us here. I've told you both. I'm going to spend time with both of you, be honest with both of you, and figure out who is the right person for me. I can't choose, Amir. I'm letting fate decide." Amir smiled, a small, genuine curve of his lips. "I see. I'm being put to the test. All right, Julia. I'm up for the challenge. You know what they say about pilots? We like a little competition." He raised his mug in a salute. "Let me know when the date is, and I'll plan something that blows his out of the water." Dinner with Liam that evening. Julia met Liam at a small, dimly lit bistro in Tahoe City. He was already there, impeccably dressed in a dark blazer that contrasted with the more rugged, casual mountain crowd. Liam, the artist and art dealer, always carried an air of quiet sophistication. When he stood to greet her, he didn't try to hug her or kiss her cheek. He simply held her chair and offered a gentle, reassuring smile. He was a quiet, considerate gentleman. "You look beautiful, Julia," he said, his voice a low, soothing anchor. Julia settled into the chair, the butterflies from her first date with him returning with a vengeance. "Thank you for still meeting me," she said. "I was really nervous after our phone call." "You shouldn't have been," Liam replied, picking up the wine list. "I meant what I said, and I appreciate your courage more than you know. To start any potential connection with that level of honesty is rare." They ordered dinner, falling into a rhythm of thoughtful, focused conversation that was the complete opposite of her easy banter with Amir. Liam asked detailed questions about her veterinary work, the challenges of clinic management, and her life in Tahoe with Kona and Molokai. He talked about his own work, the difficulty of balancing the creative chaos of being an artist with the pragmatic business of being an art dealer. "And what about the other man?" Liam asked softly over the entrees, his eyes holding hers without judgment. "The one you're spending time with?" Julia knew this was the second, necessary piece of honesty. "His name is Amir. He's a pilot, and he's staying next door to me. He's incredibly funny, very kind, and we have the most natural, easy chemistry. The connection with him is immediate and bright." "And you told him about me?" "Yes, and I told him about being trans, just like I told you. I told him I couldn't choose, and that I was going to see where things lead with both of you. Liam took a moment, absorbing her words. He wasn't smiling, but his expression was one of deep consideration. Julia, thank you again for treating me with respect. I was right about you from the moment we had coffee. My feelings for you haven't diminished since then. You are a truly exceptional woman, and I want a chance to prove to you that the depth of connection matters more than the convenience of proximity. He reached across the table, not to touch her hand, but to simply tap the table near her. I won't lie and say that having competition is ideal, but it clarifies things. I'm leaving for Reno tomorrow morning, but I will be back. I want you to know that I'm here, and I want to see you again. But I want to see you, Julia, all of you. No compromises. Julia left the dinner feeling energized, but the confusion remained. Amir offered lightness and shared laughter. Liam offered deep, affirming understanding. Both had accepted her, not just as a woman, but as a woman with a complicated choice ahead. The decision had been deferred, but the weight of it had doubled. Sisterly counsel the next morning, Julia knocked on Arohi and Sandra's door, carrying a plate of caramelized tofu lettuce cups, her silent offering of friendship and apology. Amir had left an hour earlier, promising to call her from the airport, but not before challenging her to a kayak race the next time he was in Tahoe. Arohi answered, a mug of coffee in hand, her expression immediately softening when she saw Julia's tired face. Come in. I figured you might need a safe place to land, Arohi said, ushering her toward the kitchen counter. I'm in a pickle, Arohi, Julia admitted, setting the dish down. I've done something that felt necessary, but has made everything infinitely harder. Julia then explained the situation, the unexpected return of Liam, the easy, bright connection with Amir, and her terrifying decision to tell both of them the whole truth that she was trying to choose between them, and that she was a trans woman. Arohi listened without interruption, only nodding occasionally. I just don't know what to do, Julia finally sighed, running a hand through her hair. I honestly expected to lose both of them. I thought once I was fully honest, one or both would get scared and run. That would have been fate's decision. But they both accepted it. And now I'm back to being the one who has to choose, and I can't. She looked at her friend, her voice cracking with vulnerability. I never expected to be in a situation like this. This isn't supposed to happen to me to a trans woman. We don't get love triangles. We usually just get the single, overwhelming question of, will they even accept me? And now I have two men who do, and I'm frozen. Arohi came around the counter and gave Julia a quick, firm hug. I hear you, and you're right. This is a big, messy, complicated problem. Arohi stepped back, a slight smile playing on her lips. Okay, look, I have to be honest with you too. I'm going to side with my brother. I have to. He's my flesh and blood, and I've never seen him so focused on a woman after just one weekend. He likes you, Jules. A lot. He's already asking me 1,000 questions about your favourite coffee and what Kona actually eats. Julia laughed, the tension easing slightly. I figured that much. But, Arohi continued, growing serious, I also understand your position. I saw how you looked at him, and I saw how you were when you told me about Liam. They offer you two very different, very real things. Amir is the effortless present. Liam is the depth and the history. You have a massive decision to make. Arohi placed both hands on Julia's arms, her gaze firm. But whatever your final decision is, I promise you it won't affect our friendship. Whether you choose Amir, Liam, or even decide to choose neither, and take a moment for yourself, Sandra and I are still here. We'll still be having block parties, and you're still invited. Julia felt a fresh wave of emotion. This time, gratitude, well up in her chest. Thank you, Arohi. That means everything. Of course. Now, tell me about this artist. Is he at least good-looking enough to make my brother jealous? Arohi teased, successfully pushing the conversation back toward the easy banter of friendship. The next move, Julia walked back across the deck to her own house. The warmth of Arohi's acceptance, a solid comfort. She made a pot of tea and stared out at the backyard. She had two beautiful paths laid out for her, the immediate, sunny road with Amir and the deeper, quieter road with Liam. Both men had proved their courage and respect by accepting her truth. The ball was now entirely in her court. They would be perfect if they were one person, she thought, a weary ache settling in her chest. But life wasn't a perfect composite, and she knew she couldn't drag this choice out. She had laid the groundwork for honesty. Now, she had to follow through with the decision. She had been a trans woman for a long time, but that didn't diminish her deeply felt desire to experience a relationship like any other woman might. to be swept off her feet, to feel cherished, adored, and wonderfully feminine around her man. She needed to know who unlocked that feeling, who made her feel the most like a woman, who, in their presence, made her feel most deeply and wonderfully feminine. This wasn't about politeness or acceptance. This was about the spontaneous, joyful feeling of being perfectly complemented by a man's energy. Did she feel adored, protected, and beautiful? The ultimate deciding factor, the first kiss. Who created a spark so potent, so undeniable, that it silenced the messy comparison in her head? She needed a kiss that was a definitive, physical answer to her question. Date 1. Amir and the Lake Amir called later that afternoon, flying in on a red-eye from Seattle, and was back in Tahoe just 2 days later. He suggested checking out the water, fulfilling his challenge. They met at the marina for a kayaking excursion. Julia was nervous, but Amir's energy was infectious. He was still funny and kind, turning a simple safety demonstration into playful jokes. They spent the afternoon on the water, laughing as they splashed each other. When they reached a quiet cove, Amir stopped paddling, leaning back to watch her. "You look amazing in the sunlight, Julia," he said, his voice quiet for the first time all day. "Like you belong here." He was playful, attentive, and his open admiration made her feel bright, beautiful, and effortlessly desired. He made her feel like a lively, fun woman, the woman she loved being in public. Back at the driveway, the air was cool, and the moment was right. Amir turned to her, his smile softening. He cupped her face gently, his eyes warm, filled with an undeniable question. He kissed her, and the spark was instant a rush of warm, electric joy. An immediate, vibrant certainty that lit up her entire body. It was the physical manifestation of their easy chemistry. When he pulled back, Julia's heart was racing. "Wow," she breathed. "Wow indeed," Amir murmured, his gaze intense. "See? I told you pilots like to challenge." Date 2, Liam and the gallery. Liam's second date was the following weekend. He returned from Reno with a quiet, considered intensity. He suggested an art exhibit in a neighbouring town, a smaller, more intimate setting that matched his style. Liam, the quiet, considerate gentleman, focused his attention entirely on her. He spoke to her softly about the art, placing his hand lightly on her lower back as they navigated the crowded room, a gesture that was protective without being possessive. His quiet strength and focused respect made her feel deeply cherished and secure. He made her feel like a valuable, important woman, the one she loved being in private. At the end of the evening, back at Julia's house, the air felt charged with deep, quiet tension. Liam reached for her, his eyes serious and intent. He didn't rush. The kiss was slow, measured, and felt like a moment of gravity pulling her in with profound, dizzying depth. It wasn't an electric spark. It was a quiet, consuming flame that felt less like a question and more like an answer. It affirmed she was seen, loved, and fully accepted. The unshakable anchor the evening with Liam was exactly as Julia expected, thoughtful, focused, and deeply affirming. Liam, the quiet, considerate gentleman, moved through her kitchen with a quiet grace, deferring to her on spice levels and chopping vegetables with focused precision. There was no electric rush, just a deep, comforting ease. Julia felt seen not just as a desirable woman, but as a competent, cherished partner in her own space. After dinner, Julia decided to take Kona for her quick evening walk around the block. The air was cool, tinged with pine, and the rhythmic padding of Kona's paws along the gravel soothed her. She was just heading back toward the house when a sharp, grating voice cut through the quiet. "Put that mutt on a leash, Julia." Julia froze. On the sidewalk stood Dorothy, the neighborhood menace, her scowl deeper than ever. But this time, she wasn't just wagging her finger. She was holding a bright pink taser, its electric crackle lighting the shadows. Julia pulled Kona closer by the collar, her pulse spiking. "Dorothy, put that away. That beast is dangerous," Dorothy snarled, taking a deliberate step forward. "Walking her without a leash? Irresponsible. She lunges at me, and I'll drop her right here." The taser hissed again, louder this time, her hand twitching like she was ready to strike. Kona barked, deep and protective, pressing closer against Julia's leg. Julia's throat tightened, fear clawing at her chest. She could imagine that crackle against Kona's fur, against her skin. Her mouth opened, but her voice broke uselessly. The front door slammed open. Enough. Liam's voice roared across the yard, cutting like thunder. He charged down the steps, closing the distance in long strides, and planted himself between Julia and Dorothy, his frame an immovable barrier. "You are not pointing that thing at her, or at her dog." Dorothy flinched, the taser jerking in her hand. But she held her ground, eyes narrowing. "She's violating the rules." She spat, stepping closer, the weapon raised higher. "There are no rules." Liam's voice dropped into a hard, steady growl. "And you know it. If you take one more step with that taser in your hand, we'll be calling the sheriff tonight, and we'll make sure every neighbour testifies." The air snapped with tension. Kona growled low. Julia clung to her collar, and Dorothy's hand trembled visibly. For a terrible heartbeat, Julia thought the weapon might actually spark against them. But Liam didn't flinch. He leaned in, his voice a cold, unshakable command. "Put it away." Dorothy's bravado cracked. She muttered something about irresponsible people and dangerous dogs, then stumbled backward, retreating into the shadows, taser still in hand but lowered. Julia sagged, her knees weak. Liam turned instantly, his eyes locking onto hers not for thanks, but to make sure she was all right. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice softer now. Julia swallowed hard, nodding. I didn't know what to do." "You didn't have to." He reached for her, steady and sure. "That's why I'm here." He wrapped her in his arms, calm and protective, his presence dissolving the fear that still quaked in her chest. Julia buried her face against him, breathing in the quiet strength he carried so effortlessly. It wasn't the high-wire thrill Amir gave her. It wasn't butterflies of uncertainty. It was something far deeper, the unshakable certainty that she and her world were safe, because Liam would meet life's storms not with chaos, but with grace and steel. For the first time in her life, Julia felt entirely, deeply grounded. Liam wasn't just a spark. He was her anchor. The final kiss Julia was still trembling from the confrontation, her pulse echoing the crackle of the taser long after Dorothy had vanished into the night. Inside the house, the air felt warmer, steadier, as though the walls themselves had absorbed Liam's calm strength and now wrapped around her in comfort. Liam guided her gently to the kitchen, where Kona immediately pressed against Julia's leg, tail thumping with relief. Julia knelt, stroking the dog's fur, whispering, "It's okay, sweet girl. Mama's okay. You're safe." When she rose, Liam was watching her not with pity, not with bravado, but with that same steady certainty that had sent Dorothy retreating. His presence filled the room, solid and unshakable, and Julia realized her fear had already begun to dissolve in the safety of him. "Julia," he said quietly, taking a step closer. "You don't have to carry this kind of fear alone. Not ever again." Her breath caught. The words, simple as they were, landed deeper than anything she'd heard in years. Not promises of excitement, not declarations of desire, just a vow of presence, of protection, of partnership. Tears pricked at her eyes, but they weren't born of fear. They were born of the profound relief of being seen, cherished, and shielded without question. When Liam reached for her hand, his touch was deliberate, his thumb brushing across her palm with a gentleness that unravelled the last of her tension. He drew her closer, his dark eyes holding hers with a certainty that silenced every lingering doubt. "You're incredible, Julia," he murmured, his voice low and unwavering. "The way you love, the way you stand tall, even when the world tries to push you down. I love how you are with them. I love how you are with me." He framed her face in his hands, his touch strong, yet unbelievably tender. The kiss that followed wasn't rushed or frantic, it was steady, grounding, and absolute. It wasn't the electric thrill Amir had given her, nor the fluttering uncertainty of butterflies. It was the kiss of belonging, of safety, of home. It was the kiss of a man who had already proven himself in the storm, and who would stand as her anchor for all the storms to come. Julia met it fiercely, her hands sliding into his hair, pulling him closer. This wasn't hesitation. This wasn't comparison. This was choice, raw and unshaken. She kissed him with everything she had, claiming him as surely as he had protected her. When they finally broke apart, her chest heaved, her eyes dark with certainty. She no longer felt like she was floating between two worlds, torn by what-ifs. In Liam's arms, she was grounded, whole, and entirely herself. "Don't talk," she whispered, her voice husky with feminine confidence and desire. "Just be here, now." She didn't wait for him to lead. She laced her fingers through his and guided him toward the bedroom, no longer burdened by doubt. Tonight wasn't about proving acceptance. Tonight was about surrendering to love, the steady, profound kind that anchored her to the woman she had always fought to be. In the silver light of her room, their closeness unfolded not as urgency, but as reassurance. Liam's hands moved with reverence, every touch more about comfort than conquest, mapping her body with the same care he had shown her heart. Julia melted into him, not with desperation, but with the quiet joy of being held exactly as she was. When they finally came together, it wasn't fire consuming them, it was warmth enveloping them. She felt safe, seen, and cherished. His strength met her softness, not to overwhelm, but to cradle, to remind her that she was loved and wholly accepted. For Julia, it was more than intimacy. It was the proof that she was no longer alone in the storm. Afterward, wrapped in his arms, Julia didn't need to speak. The rhythm of his breathing, the steady weight of his presence, and the way Kona sighed contentedly at the foot of the bed, all told her what words couldn't. She had chosen not just passion, but peace. The gentleman's farewell the following morning, Julia knew she had a difficult step ahead of her. As much as she cherished the peace she had found with Liam, she couldn't leave her time with Amir unresolved. He had been important, vibrant, kind, and genuine, and she owed him honesty, spoken face to face. Amir had texted his flight details, a quick turnaround in San Francisco before heading to Tokyo. Julia knew she couldn't just send a message. Their connection, brief as it was, deserved a proper goodbye. The drive to the airport gave her time to reflect. The certainty of Liam's presence was like calm waters beneath her, steady and grounding. But as she thought of Amir, she smiled through the ache he had been laughter and light, a reminder that she was still capable of joy and spontaneity. He had been part of her journey to this choice, and she would always carry that with her. At the quiet airport lounge, she spotted him immediately. Crisp uniform, posture sharp, yet his smile was the same easy and warm. He stood when he saw her, as though nothing had changed, though his eyes already seemed to understand. "Julia," he said softly, pulling out a chair for her. "I had a feeling you might come. You've got that look in your eyes, the one that says you found your landing strip." Her throat tightened. Trust Amir to make it easier. She reached for his hand across the table. "Amir, I needed to tell you in person. I made my choice. I'm choosing Liam." For a beat, his expression was unreadable. Then he smiled, genuine and unforced. The artist, then. There was no bitterness in his tone, only quiet reflection. Julia's voice wavered, but her conviction held. "It was easy and fun with you. You made me laugh, you reminded me how good it feels to be wanted, and I'll always be grateful for that. But with Liam, it's different. He makes me feel safe, steady. I need that." Amir squeezed her hand gently before letting it go. "Then you made the right choice." His smile widened, reaching his eyes this time. "And Julia, you're an amazing woman. Don't ever forget that. You reminded me, too, that there are good things waiting when I land." She blinked back tears, whispering, "I'm going to miss you. And I'll miss you, Tahoe tour guide." He chuckled softly, standing to embrace her. It was a warm, respectful hug, one that honoured what they had shared without clinging to it. "But don't worry, pilots don't stay grounded for long. I'll find my own anchor, in my own time." She watched Amir disappear into the flow of travellers, his figure sharp against the blur of the crowd. Then she turned back toward Tahoe, her heart lighter. She had said goodbye with grace, and at home peace and laughter were waiting for her, the life she had chosen, and the love that had chosen her right back. Epilogue. 1 year later, the house, once Julia's quiet sanctuary, now hummed with a different kind of life-assured rhythm of peace and security. 1 year after choosing Liam, their days had settled into something both simple and profound. Liam, the artist, had taken root in Tahoe City. His small, carefully curated gallery reflected the same steadiness he brought to Julia's life-moody landscapes and quiet abstractions, arranged with purpose, each piece holding a story. Julia often stopped by after her clinic shifts, smiling at the way his eyes softened whenever she walked through the door, as though she were the most important part of the room. At home, their love showed itself in the small things, Liam chopping vegetables while Julia stirred a pot, their movements quiet and in sync. The warmth of morning coffee shared on the deck, steam curling between them while Kona sprawled at their feet. Kai occasionally chose Liam's side of the bed, a silent feline endorsement that Julia still teased him about. These weren't grand gestures. They were the anchors of daily life, grounding Julia in the certainty that she was safe, secure, and exactly where she belonged. Julia's work at the clinic continued with the same passion, but Liam's presence gave her burdens a lighter weight. Whether building shelves for the cattery or photographing rescues with his artist's eye, he had become part of her mission. She no longer carried it alone. She never carried anything alone anymore. Even Amir, once the bright spark of possibility, had become a steady friend. Over block parties and lakeside weekends, the pilot and the artist had carved out a respectful camaraderie. What might have been awkward became easy, proof that honesty and kindness left no room for regret. Amir's story, too, had blossomed. On a layover in Los Angeles, he'd reconnected with Maya, an old college flame who matched his humor and energy stride for stride. Their spark reignited instantly, and within months, he was calling Julia from across the ocean with a laugh in his voice. 6 months, Jules. 6 months. And I asked her to marry me. Now, Julia and Liam were preparing to fly to London for his wedding, a celebration of not only Amir's joy, but of the strange, winding path that had brought them all here. It was fitting, Julia thought, that the man who had once been part of her choice now stood as part of her family's larger circle, his happiness as important to her as her own. But the greatest shift lay in Julia herself. Where once she measured love by butterflies or sparks, she now understood the deeper truth. Love that lasts isn't about constant fire. It's about the quiet flame that never wavers, the steady warmth that makes a house into a home. In Liam's presence, Julia didn't feel the need to prove, to question, or to hope for acceptance. She simply was, and she was cherished.